The insult landed before the man even reached the car. It came wrapped in politeness, sharpened by tone, and carried the precision of someone who had practiced this kind of cruelty before. The salesman looked him over, shoes first, then shirt, then silence. The judgment was quick, confident, and final. A smirk followed, small and professional. Are you looking for someone or admiring a car you can't afford? Sir, why not try the used lot down the street? The showroom turned to watch. Laughter flickered in corners. Polished glass reflected it all. The man's calm posture against the dealer's performance of superiority. No one stepped in. No one ever does when arrogance is dressed in customer service. The man's name was not yet known in this place. To them, he was a silhouette that didn't fit the price tag of the machine beside him, a Mercedes-Benz S-Class, black and liquid under the lights. They saw fabric, not fortune, skin, not status. He remained silent. Silence unsettles men who expect apology. The salesman was Carter, describing models he believed more realistic. He used the word realistic the way some men use the word limit. Every sentence tightened the noose of humiliation. Each smile, each laugh from across the showroom floor became part of the ritual. The small, daily ceremony of superiority performed without conscience. Still the man didn't move. His stillness grew heavier than any reply. Even the showroom lights seemed to bend toward him, bright and indifferent, like an eye recording evidence. The sales manager noticed from the upper office. He watched through glass, comfortable in distance, thinking this was nothing more than a salesman protecting his time. He didn't see it for what it was, a transaction of dignity, stolen in plain sight. The man finally turned toward the door. To the onlookers it looked like defeat. To him, it was simply withdrawal, an engineer watching a flawed system collapse under its own design. No one realized that the departure was the beginning of audit, not surrender. The ledger had been opened. The numbers would balance later. He stepped outside into the glare of noon. Behind him, the laughter continued, brief and careless. Inside, Carter straightened his tie, proud of his efficiency. He believed he had saved the dealership time. He didn't know he had just cost himself so much than he expected. Outside, the man paused on the pavement. The wind moved gently through the flags above the dealership, snapping the Mercedes-Benz logo against the blue of a cloudless day. Across the street, other buildings stood in their own mirrored stillness. Banks, cafes, offices, each one reflecting the same pattern of assumption and surface. He reached into his pocket, took out his phone, and made a quiet note. Not a call. Not a complaint. Just a reminder. Then he walked away, unhurried. Inside, Carter resumed his performance. Another customer approached, greeted with exaggerated warmth. His colleagues laughed about something unrelated, but the tone of it held the leftover echo of what had just happened. The atmosphere returned to its comfortable routine, but something invisible had shifted. The air carried the faint static charge of a moral imbalance waiting to correct itself. Hours passed. The light changed color on the cars, sliding from white noon to the gold of early evening. Carter worked through potential leads, printed brochures, offered rehearsed smiles. Each transaction felt ordinary. The manager, from his glass office, saw only numbers. Sales targets, commission sheets, brand satisfaction scores. The showroom, to him, was a living spreadsheet of metrics and margins. He had seen many moments like the one earlier, small acts of dismissal disguised as efficiency. To question them would be to question the entire structure that rewarded such judgment. So he didn't. He simply filed the memory away with a mild sense of disapproval and returned to his reports. Across the city, the man who had been insulted visited another dealership. Not by coincidence, but by quiet design. He observed their approach, their tone, the way they offered water before questions. He noted professionalism, not politeness. One salesman listened without assumption, asked about fleet purchasing, about specifications suitable for long-term contracts. Numbers were discussed, dates recorded. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. At the end, there was a handshake, brief, firm, unremarkable except for the consequences it would soon carry. Back at Carter's showroom, the day ended as all others did. The glass doors locked with a muted click, the lights dimmed to a soft silver glow. The cars stood silent, immaculate, waiting for the next day's theater of desire and pretense. Carter left through the side exit, car keys in hand, already thinking about weekend plans and commissions to collect. He never considered that arrogance has a half-life, that it decays, but never disappears. At home, he replayed the day's events in fragments. The man's face, calm and unreadable. The laughter. The small sense of triumph that had felt so necessary in the moment. It all came back with an aftertaste of discomfort. He told himself it didn't matter. People who look like that don't buy cars like these. That was the rule, unwritten but reliable. Still, some small part of him wished he hadn't said what he said. Conscience is an expensive feature, not everyone can afford it. The next morning arrived with the sterile brightness of a new sales day. The staff assembled, smiling, rehearsed, uniform. The manager reminded them of their quotas, their responsibilities, their promise to uphold the brand's experience. Carter nodded, adjusted his tie again, and positioned himself near the newest model, a flawless black sedan polished to a mirror's edge. He liked the reflection it gave him. Sharp, professional, successful. Reflection is easy to mistake for reality. Just before noon, the phone on the manager's desk rang. It wasn't unusual, but the tone of the conversation that followed shifted the rhythm of the entire room. Words like corporate purchase, fleet order, and executive authorization floated through the glass. Carter caught fragments and straightened instinctively, sensing opportunity. The manager's expression softened into a smile that only appears when profit enters the room. When the call ended, the manager descended the stairs, his movements brisk, his tone controlled. He announced that a high-value client was finalizing a large acquisition, several vehicles, premium models, possibly more over the coming months. He wanted everyone alert, professional, ready to assist if the client visited in person. The showroom buzzed with anticipation. Carter, already calculating his advantage, felt the pulse of ambition quicken. He didn't yet know that the call had come from the man he had dismissed the day before. By midday, the showroom had turned into a stage. Every desk was cleared, every car aligned at an angle chosen to suggest effortless perfection. The staff moved with quiet urgency, adjusting brochures, wiping away invisible dust, polishing details that no customer ever noticed but which the brand demanded. The air smelled faintly of leather and ozone, a controlled scent meant to mimic success. Carter's confidence returned with each movement. He rehearsed his smile in the tinted glass, imagined the handshake that would follow the signing of a major deal. His thoughts arranged themselves around commission percentages and the subtle politics of credit for the sale. He saw himself mentioned in the manager's briefing, his name spoken with approval. The humiliation of the previous day blurred, reduced to an anecdote without consequence. Outside, the weather held still, sunlight glinting on the long line of cars that bordered the street. The world looked precise and expensive. Inside, time began to slow in the way it always does before something irreversible. The first car from the potential order arrived for inspection, a courtesy demonstration. Carter watched as it was rolled into position by the service team. It was identical to the one he had guarded so possessively the day before, the same black S-Class with glass deep enough to reflect nothing clearly. He felt ownership through proximity, pride through polish. He did not question why this particular model had been chosen for review. The manager moved constantly between phone calls and polite instructions. His tone carried the unease of opportunity that might disappear if handled without precision. He reminded the staff to remain available but invisible, present but deferential. The language of luxury always hides hierarchy inside courtesy. Carter waited near the main entrance, expecting the client to arrive at any moment. Each time the glass doors opened, he straightened. Each time they closed, the moment dissolved back into routine. Minutes stretched into hours. The excitement began to taste like nervousness. At 2 o'clock, a courier delivered an envelope. It was addressed to the manager but marked personal. He opened it at his desk, his expression tightening as he read. There were documents inside: confirmation of payment, copies of identification, authorization for the transfer of multiple vehicles to a corporate buyer. The buyer's name matched the one from the phone call, a company Carter had never heard of but which the manager recognized immediately as a major logistics group. The order was large, verified, and already processed through another branch of the same brand. The manager reread the last line of the correspondence twice. The client had chosen a different dealership after a less than professional encounter at this one. The signature at the bottom belonged to the man Carter had humiliated. The office fell silent. The manager closed the envelope carefully, as if the paper inside were fragile. He stared through the glass walls at the showroom floor, where Carter stood still in the precise center of a reflection of his own ambition. The manager did not call him over immediately. He needed a moment to translate irritation into professionalism. When he finally stepped out, the weight of the air changed. Every employee felt it. The showroom, once bright with anticipation, now seemed heavy with unspoken understanding. The manager's tone was measured, his face neutral. He asked Carter to join him upstairs. No one looked directly at them as they walked past. Inside the glass office, the truth unfolded quietly. The words were formal, but the meaning was unmistakable. A major sale had been lost, several vehicles, substantial revenue, a partnership that could have reshaped the dealership's year-end report. All because of a single moment of arrogance. The details were simple enough to summarize, yet heavy enough to dismantle reputation. Carter listened without interruption. There was no defense that sounded professional when spoken aloud. He thought of the man's stillness, the absence of anger, the calm that had seemed almost deliberate. He understood, too late, that silence can be the most articulate reply to insult. Outside the office, the staff worked quietly, pretending not to notice the conversation above them. The tension leaked through the glass like a slow current. Even the lights seemed to dim, reflecting less sharply off the cars. The illusion of perfect surfaces began to crack. The manager concluded the meeting without drama. There would be a report, a review, perhaps a written warning. Consequences dressed in corporate language. But the real punishment had already been delivered. The irreversible awareness that one careless act had carried measurable cost. Carter returned to his station. He moved mechanically, sorting papers that no longer needed sorting, straightening a brochure that no one would read. The sound of the clock against the far wall grew louder. Each second marked a space between what he had been certain of and what he now knew. In the corner of the showroom, a small group of junior sales staff whispered. Their tone held the cautious curiosity of witnesses learning how quickly hierarchy can invert. They had seen arrogance rewarded many times before, now they saw it lose its value in real time. Evening arrived again. The city outside began to glow with reflected light from traffic and office towers. Carter stood at the window, watching his own reflection superimposed on the street beyond. The cars inside the glass looked as though they were floating, detached from everything that was real. He thought about calling the client, about apologizing, about trying to explain. But explanations are transactions that buy nothing. He understood that now. The man he had dismissed had already made his point, not through anger, but through precision. He had shifted his purchase elsewhere, and with that quiet decision, rebalanced the moral equation. Carter turned away from the window. Behind him, the showroom lights reflected like judgment, bright, impartial, endless. It began as a whisper between desks, then as a shared glance across meetings, until finally it settled into the air like dust that refused to leave. The dealership still looked immaculate, but beneath the surface, something had cracked. Numbers that once seemed reliable began to lose their meaning. Confidence turned into caution. The report arrived 3 days later, printed on heavy paper with the company's emblem embossed at the top. It did not mention names directly, but everyone knew who it referred to. The language was formal, the tone surgical. Client experience below brand standards. Lost acquisition of strategic value. Recommendation, internal review of conduct and customer relations. Words designed not to wound, but to expose. The manager read it twice, then a third time. He felt the faint tightening of responsibility. The loss was not his fault, yet it happened under his watch, in his showroom. Every executive understands that failure, even by association, stains upward as well as downward. He scheduled a meeting with the regional office, already crafting sentences that might reduce blame. Carter arrived that morning unaware of the document's arrival. He followed routine signing in, polishing, straightening displays as if repetition could undo consequence. When the manager called him into the office, his steps slowed. He saw the report on the desk before he reached the chair. It looked small but heavy, like a record of something irreversible. The manager spoke in phrases designed for professionalism. Accountability, performance evaluation, training opportunity. Beneath the measured tone, the meaning was clear. The brand had taken notice, and the brand does not forgive embarrassment. Carter nodded at intervals, hearing the rhythm of his own downfall. After the meeting, the staff avoided eye contact. Reputation decays silently but visibly, like rust beneath paint. Every movement he made seemed to echo louder than it should. When he answered calls, colleagues glanced sideways. When he greeted visitors, the manager subtly redirected them elsewhere. The hierarchy that had once protected him now treated him as a liability to be contained. Outside the dealership, the story moved faster. The logistics company that had made the purchase issued a statement praising the professionalism of the other branch, the one that had received the order. The article appeared in a local business column, brief but unmistakable. The dealership's name was not mentioned, but silence can be louder than exposure. Those who knew understood. Those who didn't would soon learn. At headquarters, the data appeared as a discrepancy in regional performance metrics. A potential account lost, revenue missed, corporate satisfaction flagged. It triggered an automated alert in the system, the kind designed to detect inefficiency. Within hours, it reached an executive assistant, then a director. No one at that level cared about individual salesmen or their judgments, but everyone cared about trends. Reputation, after all, is the currency that determines longevity. Emails followed. Queries about training standards, customer verification, the adherence to inclusive excellence policies. Corporate language that carried the chill of distant authority. The dealership became a case study without ever being named. Carter began to feel time differently. Days lengthened, the clock marking each second with surgical precision. He noticed details he had ignored before: the hum of the air conditioning, the faint vibration of footsteps on the tiled floor, the metallic scent of new cars. The environment that had once represented success now felt like a laboratory examining failure. The manager tried to maintain normalcy, but normalcy cannot coexist with investigation. Representatives from the regional office arrived unannounced one afternoon, dressed in muted suits, their presence calm but final. They observed, took notes, asked for access to customer feedback files. Their questions were polite but relentless. They did not accuse, they documented. Documentation, in corporate culture, is the quiet beginning of consequence. By evening, Carter's confidence had been reduced to process. He smiled mechanically, offered greetings that sounded memorized, and moved with the precision of someone who no longer believed in the meaning of his own gestures. He had not been suspended, but isolation had already begun its work. In a system built on perception, invisibility is the first stage of erasure. Outside the glass walls, the city carried on as if nothing had changed. Cars moved through traffic, indifferent to the small moral collapse occurring behind the showroom windows. The man who had initiated it all remained unseen. His life followed a different rhythm: meetings, decisions, the quiet satisfaction of efficiency. He did not seek revenge, he sought balance. Justice, when cleanly executed, leaves no fingerprints. At the other dealership, the newly signed contract was celebrated quietly. No speeches, no photographs. The client's representative had made it clear: professionalism was the only standard worth acknowledging. The staff accepted this without question. Profit, after all, is the purest validation. Back at Carter's branch, the effect of that loss became mathematical. Targets adjusted downward. Bonuses reduced. The manager, once distant, began spending more time on the floor, observing with subtle impatience. He blamed the atmosphere, though he never said it aloud. Everyone blamed something different: but the cause remained singular. The cars still gleamed beneath the lights, each one a polished symbol of aspiration. Yet beneath that perfection lay the memory of a single assumption, a single act of casual dismissal that had rewritten the dealership's fortunes. Arrogance, once mistaken for confidence, had revealed itself as the most expensive flaw in the building. As night fell, Carter locked the main doors and paused for a moment in the empty showroom. The silence felt heavier than usual, as if the space itself had learned something. He glanced at the cars, their reflections multiplying endlessly across the glass. Somewhere in those reflections, he saw himself, not the image he had once curated, but the version left behind when pride evaporates. He turned off the lights and left without looking back. The dealership's rhythm no longer resembled business. It resembled recovery. Every motion carried the stiffness of supervision. The regional representatives returned each morning, their presence no longer unusual but still unwelcome. They did not speak much. They watched. Their notebooks filled slowly lines of neat handwriting that translated human behavior into procedural evidence. Carter learned to anticipate the questions before they were asked. He presented numbers, schedules, attendance logs, anything that proved activity, not value. His performance became a gesture of obedience. The others copied his tone, careful, neutral, free of opinion. Fear, when institutionalized, looks identical to professionalism. The manager's optimism thinned. He had always believed that efficiency could cleanse any mistake. But efficiency could not alter narrative, and narrative had escaped containment. The lost fleet order had become a minor legend within the region, an invisible story carried by internal calls and meetings, repeated with slight variations. No one needed to say his name. Everyone knew which dealership had misjudged a client who looked ordinary but held extraordinary authority. Corporate image teams arrived next, not for punishment but for repair. They photographed the showroom, drafted new customer care protocols, arranged diversity awareness sessions. Their approach was polite but antiseptic. They treated morality as a logistical problem, something to be recalibrated through training modules and slogans. The staff sat through the sessions quietly, nodding at intervals. None of them believed the words would change anything, but belief was not required. Attendance was. Carter watched from the back of the room. The phrases on the screen, respect, empathy, equality, glowed in pale blue. Each term felt like an accusation written in corporate vocabulary. He had used those same words once in sales pitches, describing the brand's values to clients. Now they returned as evidence against him. Outside the training room, business continued, but slower. Clients arrived hesitantly, sensing the dealership's altered tone. Some had heard rumors. Others simply felt the difference in the air, the loss of confidence, the strain behind rehearsed smiles. Luxury depends on illusion. Once the illusion fractures, even perfection looks desperate. The manager attempted new strategies. He increased advertising, offered incentives, met with regional directors. Yet nothing replaced what had been lost. Trust, once gone, does not regenerate through promotion. It requires silence, humility, and time, currencies the dealership no longer possessed. Meanwhile, the man whose absence had created this collapse remained invisible. He made no public statement, filed no complaint. His name appeared only on documents within corporate archives, a line of ink attached to a decision. In that anonymity lay power, the kind that alters systems without revealing the hand that moved them. His action had already fulfilled its purpose. Everything that followed was simply gravity doing its work. Weeks passed. Carter's role diminished further. He handled paperwork no one wanted, test drives no one scheduled. Each task felt smaller, yet heavier. The cars he once admired became mirrors reflecting the cost of assumption. He began arriving early, not from enthusiasm but to avoid attention. The others treated him politely, but distance had replaced camaraderie. Isolation became his uniform. The manager's reports grew defensive. Phrases like temporary downturn and market adjustment appeared more often. Regional headquarters accepted them without comment, knowing the pattern too well. A brand may forgive failure, but it never forgets reputation. The dealership's metrics continued to decline, slow but steady, like a heartbeat fading from exhaustion. One evening, after the staff had left, the manager stayed behind. He walked through the silent showroom, counting reflections in the glass. Every vehicle looked immaculate, yet he felt surrounded by ghosts, the clients lost, the arrogance unlearned, the lesson unpaid. He knew he would soon be transferred, perhaps quietly replaced. Leadership absorbs responsibility the way glass absorbs fingerprints, invisibly, but permanently. Carter, too, sensed the approaching end. He no longer planned weekends or measured months in commissions. His world had shrunk to daily repetition, a sequence of gestures meant to appear useful. Pride had evaporated, leaving behind something closer to awareness. He understood that humiliation can educate in ways success never could, though the tuition was brutal. Corporate oversight eventually concluded its review. The findings were unremarkable: recommendations for retraining, policy reinforcement, communication alignment. The official language suggested closure, but closure is a myth. Consequences merely change form. The regional representatives departed as quietly as they had arrived. The dealership remained, altered yet unchanged, polished yet scarred. Outside, autumn began. Leaves collected against the glass facade, the first visible imperfection the staff would not immediately remove. The air carried a sharper chill. The lights inside reflected differently now, less like brilliance, more like exposure. The showroom stood as a monument to precision, and to the single miscalculation that had revealed what precision cannot hide. Carter locked the doors at night and watched his own reflection disappear into the darkness beyond. Somewhere else, in another part of the city, the man he had once dismissed continued his own work, unaware or uninterested in the ripples still widening behind him. The universe rarely announces its balance, it simply maintains it. The dealership's bright glass now reflected a city washed in gray. Business had slowed to its most silent rhythm. The scent of polish and synthetic leather no longer masked the fatigue that settled into every surface. The dealership, once loud with negotiation and laughter, now hummed with restrained anxiety. Sales targets were no longer ambitious, they were survival lines. Every week, new rumors traveled through the staff like electrical current. Talks of restructuring, whispers of closures, unspoken questions about who would be next to go. At the far end of the showroom, Carter's desk stood by the window, a punishment disguised as reassignment. His sales board remained mostly blank, his phone quiet. He watched the others perform their rehearsed enthusiasm, knowing what lay beneath it: fear, caution, and the desperate need to remain invisible. Then one morning, an unfamiliar car stopped outside. It wasn't extravagant, but clean and deliberate, an understated black Mercedes S-Class. The driver stepped out first, a man in a gray suit, followed by another, younger man who walked with a deliberate calm. He wore no designer label, no visible wealth, only quiet confidence. The staff straightened, instinctively sensing status without display. The manager adjusted his tie, smiling with professional warmth, unaware that this moment would complete the circle. They introduced themselves as representatives of a new logistics corporation headquartered overseas. Their company, they explained, had just finalized a multi-million-dollar expansion in the region and was ready to acquire an entire fleet of Mercedes-Benz vehicles, 50 in total, across various classes. The dealership that secured this contract would receive the largest sale in the division's recent history. The air thickened with the scent of opportunity. Carter watched, frozen between dread and recognition. The man in the gray suit remained quiet. The younger man's eyes scanned the cars with deliberate interest. The manager began his performance: rehearsed enthusiasm, polished words, the standard symphony of persuasion. He spoke of financing options, premium packages, and maintenance coverage. But his tone carried something else too, a faint residue of assumption, the same arrogance that had once surfaced in Carter's greeting months before. And then, without warning, the younger man turned his head slightly, just enough for Carter to see his face clearly. Recognition was immediate and devastating. It was him. The same man Carter had mocked at the start, the man he had judged by his clothes, dismissed as unworthy, humiliated with casual cruelty. But now he stood transformed not by change, but by revelation. He was not pretending to belong here, he owned the position. The subtle hierarchy of the room inverted instantly. Carter's breath caught, though no one noticed. The world had shifted, quietly but irrevocably. The man did not acknowledge him. He did not need to. His silence was absolute authority. He turned to the manager, thanked him for the presentation, and excused himself politely. There was no confrontation, no reminder of the past. Just composure. That was the lesson. Real power never repeats what arrogance has already confessed. They left without making a commitment. The manager assumed follow-up would come later. But later, the call arrived, not for him. The purchase went through a different dealership, the one across town. The competitors celebrated a record-breaking sale that quarter. Photos of executives shaking hands circulated through company newsletters. Bonuses were distributed. Awards were announced. Carter's dealership received none of it. Only silence. The opportunity had passed through their hands like fine dust, untouchable, irreversible. When the truth reached the regional office, the collapse became formal. The dealership was placed under audit, then consolidation. The manager was reassigned, his title reduced. Carter was quietly dismissed under the phrase, organizational restructuring. There was no ceremony, no farewell. Only an empty desk and the slow echo of footsteps leaving a space that had already forgotten him. Months later, the building stood under new ownership. The old logo was replaced, the staff rotated, the interior redesigned. History had been erased with fresh paint and glass. But morality, unlike reputation, does not fade. It lingers like a reflection no renovation can remove. Carter took smaller jobs afterward. Independent sales, used cars, side contracts. He learned to listen more, to judge less. Humility became his only luxury. Sometimes, while refueling older models on cold mornings, he would see a Mercedes fleet pass by in perfect formation, black, polished, deliberate. Each one a moving reminder of the deal he had lost, the lesson he had earned, and the man he had once underestimated. The story did not end in ruin, nor in redemption. It ended in balance. Because the universe, indifferent yet exact, always returns what arrogance takes. Sometimes in wealth. Sometimes in silence. And sometimes, in the form of a man you once told to try the cheaper cars down the street. In the months that followed, the story of the lost Mercedes fleet became dealership folklore. It moved through the city in fragments told by drivers, repeated by regional reps, whispered by salesmen in break rooms. No one remembered every detail, but everyone remembered the ending. The man who had been mocked had returned, not in anger, but in silence, and left a trail of consequence behind him. The first dealership, once the symbol of success, now existed as a warning. The numbers no longer mattered, the moral arithmetic had already been written. Every arrogant remark, every assumption, every laugh exchanged at someone's expense had accumulated interest. When the reckoning came, it wasn't loud or dramatic. It was simply exact. That was how justice often appeared in the real world, not in fire, not in confrontation, but in the slow rearrangement of circumstances. Power shifted without announcement. The man who was once invisible became the axis around which the balance turned. And those who once stood above him learned how easily the ground could move beneath their feet. Some said Carter deserved a second chance. Others said the experience had changed him, that the humiliation had burned away his pride, leaving something cleaner behind. But morality is not sentimental. It does not reward regret, it simply measures it. And the measure of a man is not how he apologizes, but how he learns to exist with what he destroyed. The fleet of 50 Mercedes-Benz vehicles became a symbol of that lesson. Each car represented a fragment of dignity once denied, a correction written not in words but in motion. They passed through the city daily, their engines quiet, their surfaces reflecting a truth money could not disguise. Respect cannot be bought after the fact. At the second dealership, the one that treated the same man with quiet professionalism, the story was remembered differently. It wasn't called luck. It was called recognition. The staff had not seen a poor man or a rich man. They had simply seen a person. And that simple act of decency had changed their entire future. Somewhere, perhaps years later, Carter would still think about that moment in the showroom. He would remember his words, his tone, the quick smirk he believed was harmless. He would remember the pause, the moment when arrogance spoke louder than reason and how the silence that followed became the sound of his undoing. The city moved on, as cities always do. The new dealership flourished. The old one vanished into corporate archives. And yet, beneath the glass and asphalt, the moral current remained, unseen, unchanging, patient. Because every world, whether of wealth or poverty, runs on the same unseen law. What you mock today may stand above you tomorrow. And when it does, it won't need revenge. Only silence, measured, calm, and final. What do you think this story teaches about respect and perception? Have you ever seen someone lose everything, not because of bad luck, but because of arrogance? This story isn't just about cars or sales, it's about human value, how easily people are judged by what they wear, not by who they are. One moment of mockery cost an entire dealership a fortune. One act of humility built another man's empire. So tell me in the comments, who do you think truly won in the end? The man who bought the cars, or the salesman who lost them? And if you were in that showroom, what would you have done differently? If this story made you think twice about how we treat people, hit that like button, share this with someone who needs the reminder, and subscribe for more true moral tales like this one, stories where arrogance meets its consequence and justice speaks through silence. Because on this channel, every story reminds us of one truth. Respect is free, but losing it can cost everything.